Well, good morning, everybody. How are we all doing?
Cool.
I thank you for showing up. This is our second presentation in our 100th anniversary presentations. We had Bishop Erickson in last month. Today we're going to be talking about the building, the buildings that we have here, and how over the 100 years, how we've incorporated the original buildings into the structure we know today. And Ed and Carl are going to be doing bulk of the presentation today. But I don't know if any of you know how the original church is still here. The library is where the altar used to be. And the chapel is, if you actually go into the chapel, this used to be the outside wall of the original church. If you go into the chapel, you'll see some yellow windows. Those are the original stained glass windows of our original 1921 church. So if anybody has not seen it, we put together this wonderful book. Thank you, Linda. Linda was our editor-in-chief. If you have not gotten it and are interested, there's still some available down in the office, $30 a piece. A lot of great information in there, including a nice section about the architecture and the history of what we have here from, like I said, our 1921 church to our 2010 was the last edition? 14. I'll let them talk. So, thank you for showing up, and here's Carl and Ed.
Get started?
Yep.
Well, thank you, Al. So, 100 years ago this week, I imagine there was a work crew getting a little panicked because a dedication ceremony had been scheduled for December 18th for the first church. So they had 5 weeks. We can feel the weather closing in as they did. We can just picture the emotions at the time. So the workers, will we be ready on time? The congregation seeing their dream being fulfilled. So we have lots of stories in our history about the church, and what Ed and I did was distill stories of the last 100 years down to about 6 stories. First, the call to build the original church, the new sanctuary in 1949, the baby boom goes to Sunday school, and the big population pressures triggered a big expansion at that point. When the front entrance to the church was moved, the decision to create today's 3-directional sanctuary, and then not to forget the organs that add beautiful music to the architecture of this building. So, Al referenced to the construction of the building. It came together like a jigsaw puzzle with the 1921 building in the middle, other buildings built around it. We have it dotted for the former parish house, which we'll talk about later, and then the former pure oil gasoline station, which we'll talk about later. Just get those in your mind. We'll be coming back to this slide a little later. So the call to build the original church. The congregation was formed in May of 1920, and the motivating force was to create an English worship service for Lutherans in Wauwatosa. And they were working under quite a fast schedule, so let me read to you from Pastor Niebling's address in January of 1922 about what the sentiments were that were fueling this very quick pace. And Pastor Niebling wrote, 2 years ago, a little band of faithful Lutherans gathered together to establish a church that worshiped in the language of our land. Although this little group acted quickly, they acted none too soon. For years, many of the Lutheran population of Wauwatosa had been wandering into congregations which welcomed them with Christian cordiality, and which ministered to them in the language which they could understand and appreciate. In addition to those who were wandering from this fold, were others of the faith who were moving into the community and who faced the danger of being among the vast majority of America's unchurched populations. That was Pastor Niebling's sentiment at the time. We got to get the church built, we got to get in there, we got to start our congregation. So they didn't have a building in May of 1920, but they had the today's Lions Club, Germania Hall, which is on 74th and St. James Street. From the head nods, everyone knows there. The cornerstone was placed only in May 1921. Now, usually these cornerstones are placed after the foundation's in, but still, it was December they were dedicating it. It was a lot of work in a few months. As I mentioned, the building was built with quite a lot of speed. They had very nice architecture and very nice finish on the outside. The inside was a bit Spartan, though, because they really didn't have everything finished on the inside. They had folding chairs. They had a small organ, which we'll talk about later. We'll come back to elements of that building a little later, but a very key feature was the moving of the cornerstone from the original position up to the current sanctuary. So if you go in to the 11 a.m. service today, if you've seen, you go to the left side of the sanctuary, 7 pews from the back, you'll see the cornerstone on the wall there. So very nice little architectural touch to bring that part of that history into the present. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ed.
As the world moved relentlessly toward war in the late 1930s and during 1940, St. Matthew's was already short of space in its small original building due to continued growth. A committee was formed in January of 1941 to begin planning for a larger church. However, when the U.S. was drawn into the war in Europe and Japan, almost all of the country's resources and manufacturing capability had to be redirected toward the war effort. And any new building unrelated to the war would have to be put on hold. When World War II finally ended in 1945, it triggered a huge demand for new building material, and there were shortages of all building materials everywhere, and prices soared and were very, very unstable at that time. So to help with the space problem, the building you see on the left was owned by the Northwestern Conservatory of Music and was located behind the Women's Club across the street. That was purchased by St. Matthew's to use for Sunday school space. And that was used for almost 30 years. In 1940, that was purchased in 1947. St. Matthew's Building Committee continued to work with architects Grasshold, Johnson, and Associates in Milwaukee and with potential builder contractors while waiting for materials to become available. Finally, in 1948, the decision was made to go ahead with the new sanctuary. Ground was broken on January 9th, 1949, and the cornerstone was laid on April 19th of that year. Construction continued at a very rapid pace throughout 1949, and the new sanctuary was dedicated on January 8th of 1950. So 1 day short of a year from cornerstone to dedication, which is really remarkable. And the total cost of building the sanctuary was $285,000. The sanctuary is built in what's known as an English Gothic style, which is characterized by the peaked arches, over the doors and windows, and the wooden prefabricated arches formed the major support for the roof. These arches came all the way down to the floor. They do extend all the way down to the floor level, outside the wall. Although you don't see them, they go into the wall. And the then they're enclosed on the outside of the wall in a stone structure resembling a buttress. The steel and concrete made up the rest of the structure, and smooth plaster was used over all the interior. Okay,
Okay.
go to the next section here with Carl.
So the first record of religious education at St. Matthew's was from 1924. They had at that time weekday religious school and had one class of students. So that's how things began. And they used the term Bible school from the 1930s up to 1943, when it became known as Sunday school. Now, by the end of 1930s, the Bible school enrollment had increased to the extent that 2 sessions were scheduled for each Sunday. So you couldn't even fit all the children into Sunday school, let alone all the church members, so 2 sessions for church and 2 sessions for Sunday school. So actually the pressure for Sunday school growth was happening about a generation before myself and other baby boomers arrived on the scene, although I did not arrive here. Ed mentioned the parish house, which was just to the south of this building. That had rooms for Sunday school. They also used space in what's now the Irish Fest building. It used to be the Masonic Temple. And so this is the parish house, and then they also used the Conservatory of Music building. So three other buildings for Sunday school. The little news clip from November 9th, 1947. Sunday school is now held at 2 periods, and enrollment has increased markedly. The Reverend William Niebling is the pastor. The church is seeking an assistant pastor to relieve the burden of 3 identical morning services besides the 2 schools every Sunday morning. You can imagine, Pastor Niebling was busy. Now, in order to make space for the new education wing, they had to take down the parish house. One of the architectural visions of that was keeping it in the style of the existing church. It was going to be a smaller building because it ended sort of way back there. But I think they realized they really needed the space, so they went to the more contemporary look, sort of more matching, more with the Methodist Church next door. So I'm not sure that's what on the architectural mind, but that's what we see today, something that blends. So the groundbreaking for this building was in January of 1963, and it was dedicated in February 1964. Again, I think it went very quickly. There were a few different names for this building originally. One was the new parish house, one was the education building, one was the youth and choir addition, but the formal name was the Reverend William Niebling, Doctor of Divinity, Christian Educational Center. Oh. And then we'll get another 20 years in the future, and Ed will talk about the entrance.
in 1986, a conscious decision was made to move the main entrance of our church to the west side of the building. Two earlier events enabled this decision. Much earlier, in 1958, we were able to purchase the Pure Oil Station, which located on Milwaukee Avenue, right outside of these windows, and just to the west of where we are now. So from that point, we owned the land and the building, and we leased it to the station operator until 1986. So we were in the gasoline business, as well as the spiritual health business. The Pure Oil Company also sold us 2 empty lots across the street, where we now have our second parking lot. So this was all purchased with the idea of expanding eventually expanding St. Matthew's property. That was the purpose of it. What did I do? At any rate, the second item that happened in there was in the early 80s. The city of Wauwatosa came up with a big idea that they were going to widen Wauwatosa Avenue in front of our church, which is up at the top of the picture, where Wauwatosa Avenue is. They were going to widen it to 4 lanes and plus parking, since it is a state highway down through here and a major route to the hospital. But the if they'd gone ahead with that project as originally proposed, we would have had to move the sidewalk back to right against our front face of that. I keep hitting the wrong button. Against the front face, and our would have had to remove the steps that are in front of our main door out there, and that whole thing would have had to been reconfigured to come in the sides of the entrance vestibule down there. Fortunately, the plan also called for removing all of the trees up along Wauwatosa Avenue between here and North Avenue. And that didn't set too well with the people of Wauwatosa. There was a big stink raised, and the project got cut back to where they just widened the street to 4 lanes without parking. So the net result was we lost parking on the east side of the building. Now people who arrive for St. Matthew's services there's plenty of space for parking on the west side, and we have room to develop more parking, but people then had to walk all the way around to the building to get to the front entrance. So this decision was pretty straightforward, that the obvious solution was to tear down the gas station and to enlarge the main parking lot and then build a new west face of the building. What am I doing? Sure. For some reason, I must be overloading the amplifier. Oh, okay. The 1987-88 construction project created the new west face of the building as we see it today. The tower contained an elevator, which was necessary for getting people, handicapped people, up to the sanctuary level. And the main entrance became obvious then. And the other thing I wanted to mention was the architect's drawing, as you see here, had a steeple with a cross on top. But Pastor Gary wasn't particularly happy with that, didn't like it. And so it was left off and hasn't been brought up since. It is still possible, but I don't know what would, if there'd be enough support for that sort of thing or not. But anyway, this is the face of St. Matthew's that you see on all the letterheads and on the voice. It is today our front face. All subsequent renovations and rebuilding have carried that theme further to make it easier to get into the building, easier to operate with this as the main entrance. So we were very fortunate that that all worked out. Then the next thing we wanted to talk about was our decision to expand the sanctuary. In 1997, another building committee, which I happened to be on, began work on plans to renovate our sanctuary. The main goals of this renovation were to increase seating capacity, increase socialization and visitation space, and to find a way to add a bigger organ than we had at that time. We evaluated many ideas from candidate architects and then many more iterations with the selected architect, Crawford Murphy from Asheville, North Carolina. We finally arrived at the plan that you see in place today, that of our sanctuary as it is now. Everyone on the committee agreed that that was the best plan, the best approach for what we wanted to do. But there was a catch. The plan also cost the most of any options we had examined, at $2.4 million, plus another $425,000 for the new organ. This was much larger than any project that St. Matthew's had ever tackled before. So the committee basically decided to let the congregation decide. So after weeks of presentations and discussion, we and talking about it, and then a very long congregational meeting. The vote was close, but it passed by 22 votes.
Oh, wow.
And so the project went ahead. Construction took place mostly during 1999, and and you are all very familiar with the results. The new space retained the original English Gothic style of the original sanctuary, and lots of wood gave it a warm, inviting atmosphere. And that was all due to the influence of Pastor Gary, for the most part. He was very insistent on the use of wood for trim and decoration. one section that Carl wants to talk about the
organ notes is a play on words. I want to talk a little bit about the organs because they have such I think a big part of our worship service. Here's a quote from Igor Stravinsky talking about relationships of organs to the sanctuary. He says, "The church knew what the psalmist knew. Music praises God. Music is well or better able to praise him than the building of the church and its decorations. It is the church's greatest ornament." Now, many of you may know Mr. Stravinsky. A few years before this first building here, he caused quite a stir in Paris with a symphony called The Rite of Spring. A real revolutionary step in musicality. And St. Matthew's also has been on a quest for musicality. So we've had 5 organs over 100 years, starting with a foot-pumped reed organ in 1921. And then 1937, they had enough budget to buy a motor for it and give the organist the rest of his foot. So that's another reed type of organ. And then electronic revolution, a Hammond organ. Now we get away from sound through speakers as opposed to pipes or reeds. That was used 1942. And then a Chance organ in 1965 with 1,700 more pipes. And now we more than just about doubled that with the present Schlicker organ. Now, as doing the research for this, I relied on the history books, but I also made sure to talk to John Paradowski because I knew I would need to get his blessing on what I was saying here, and he was a great help. So I'll just give you pictures of the different organs, and actually there is a laser pointer. So if I figure out how to use it, there it is. Okay, this. I'm just going to point to it. This little organ, you can see the curvature here, foot pump organ, and the choir sat over here in the original, that building they were dedicating just about 100 years ago. In 1937, there was a rededication of the sanctuary. By then, they had paid off the debt. The debt originally was $35,000 for the first building. And they bought a used organ from the Hope Lutheran Church in Milwaukee. That's a reed organ, but the reeds are within the pipes there. That's the motor-driven reed organ. Took up considerable space. You can see they had to move the pews to create space for the choir. 1942, electric organ, much smaller, could go into the choir room, and the choir went back into the room, giving more space in the sanctuary. Remember, there's so much pressure for space. You can only sit about 200 folks in this sanctuary, and I think that was a big number. So the Hammond organ that was originally put in the original church was moved when the new sanctuary was built. It was moved to the front of the church originally. Should say that when it was moved to the front of the church, they had speakers up in the balcony, and then they also had an additional group of speakers down at the front called an echo division. So they could play, the sound was coming from the front and the balcony. Then the Chance organ was dedicated in 1965, and this is a photo from 1980, but you can see the organ pipes way up at the top, choir, quite a nice spectacle of sight and sound from up there. And then today's Schlicker organ, you notice we went from black and white to color, maybe color film somewhere along the line there. Today's organ really embraces the sanctuary so well. So in summary, the history of this building, 100 years in the making. 5 major additions, plus that 2014 project to redo the roof and the heating and ventilating system, plumbing features, sprinklers, and so forth. And I thought this quote, I've always liked this, so I'll conclude by reading that. By the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as a wide builder, and someone else is building on it, but each should build with care. 1 Corinthians. So I thought we were going to take the full hour here, but I guess we went faster, so we have plenty of time for historical corrections to the record or questions, because Ed and I are just a font of knowledge on this stuff.
The original church, now where is that if we look out? Is it, yeah,
Just on the other side of this wall.
okay.
So it's the altar is where the library is, and then extends just straight back through the commons area, and then the seating area that's just in back of where the choir sings. So it just runs from the library all along here to that wall. It's about 40 feet wide, 60 feet long inside.
Actually, those doors that we can close by the organ,
Yeah.
that was actually the outside door. You see pictures of the old church with the cross. There's a cross up there somewhere, we think, but that was the original.
Okay.
We're sitting in the 1987 area right
Yes.
now.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay.
They fit 200 people in that original footprint? Wow.
That was
Yeah,
Franklin.
sardine sandwich.
Yeah.
not social distancing. Yes.
I'm not a musician, but isn't our organ one of the largest by pipes, I guess they call it, in the industry?
No,
No,
No?
I don't
no,
think it's
No.
holds any records.
no.
No.
Schlicker is one of the best, but it's
Some cathedrals in
not.
Europe that have humongous organs.
Yeah. there's-
I mean, from a like local church perspective, I think, yeah, it is one of the larger, but yeah, I mean, if you go to Europe, I mean, it's,
There's 7,000
I see.
pipes.
yeah,
Or
but,
Chicago or New York.
I think our biggest pipe
We
is
went to the
16 feet,
program
they go to
for
32
organists.
feet on some of the bigger ones.
Yes.
When I first joined, I don't remember which iteration this was, but used to be a courtyard
Yep.
out there, and I have lots and lots of bricks at my house in my yard from the courtyard. I would come here and load my car down, and so that become the commons?
Yes. Commons was the courtyard.
So where was the library before?
The library's always there.
Oh.
Not the library commons, but the other commons, is where the courtyard was.
Originally, the library was built into the education wing.
Oh,
It
okay.
was room 201, really, or it's behind the kitchen. It's part of the it was part of where the kitchen and the usher's closet are now. It was in that, and then it was moved to its present location.
But this commons out here, that was where that courtyard was.
not
This
this
commons,
common.
the far
Oh,
commons.
That's the church. the old
This is
church.
the library commons, the regular commons,
Oh,
where we come
okay.
out of the church.
Oh,
That's where the
well,
courtyard
I
was.
guess I meant that.
Yeah.
I meant that one out there where we have coffee and stuff.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so like that was the 2000 one.
Yeah.
That's when that one happened.
Right.
So there was a point where, like, as you exited the church, basically it was kind of like just a courtyard, like you mentioned, a courtyard, and you could actually go out and when we were young, we used to, we yelled at for doing it, but yeah, we'd run out and then we'd run out and then go back in the other door and. Yeah.
I kind of love studying church architecture. I can give you a little history on steeples.
Yeah.
Around 1950, they were discontinued. The studies showed that many steeples, particularly in the prairie churches, burned down because of the steeples. And
Being hit by lightning.
yeah, and also they're very expensive. They're made of wood and expensive. But the point is that people would cut the lightning rods if they got in a feud with another church that broke away. And so the safety matter, and so they ended up in the 50s building these flat roofs with flat tops and discontinuing the steeples. And now they're going back to it, which is kind of interesting. And in the 50s also, you quit using stained glass because you wanted the world to come into you, and now they're going back to it, which is kind of interesting.
Pastor Ann?
You kind of glossed over the part about how controversial the last decision was. And, you know, I think we're so far removed from that I think there are probably a lot of people who don't realize that that was a pretty controversial thing. And you were on the building committee then, and I know that there are other people who were here at that time. Were you afraid that it was going to split the church?
Well, we were concerned about that. I think Gary had a sense that it would not be a major split. There were a few people that thought we were getting into way too much debt, and we did lose 2 or 3 families, I think, as a result, that moved elsewhere. But it wasn't a big number, and part of the problem was it was very difficult to convey what the real space was going to look like. People have trouble looking at plans and drawings and envisioning the warmth and the friendliness of the space until you get it built, and they get to walk in and wow, that's really neat.
And what was interesting about the vote is they first voted like 6-9 months earlier to buy a new organ. They voted the organ, and that went through almost unanimously
And
to
we
get a
all-
new organ, and it was almost all purchased.
Yeah, we had almost all the money
paid for.
paid for it.
But now they're starting to do these plans to try to incorporate this organ that we purchased. John has some really funky pictures. I mean, they had, in the old configuration with the balcony, they had pipes hanging over the railing. I mean, it was a nice
Yeah.
organ, it's a big organ, but we didn't have the proper place to house it. So they were, you know, pipes down the side and it's all over the place. So
Trying to put it in the balcony was just impossible.
So that was the other thing we had to incorporate in was a place to house this instrument that we purchased and almost paid for.
And its final configuration they hadn't started building anything yet. We had the number of pipes and everything all pretty well planned out, but the builder hadn't started building any of it until the plan for the sanctuary was finalized, and we said, okay, you've got this space, you got this much space.
And the organ is in where the altar was on the old configuration.
Yeah.
I think Jane had her
Yeah,
hand up.
Yep.
just one of my favorite things that occurred out of all of these things is the space out there that people can gather and spend time and talk to each other. And I think that has had a very wonderful effect
Yes.
on our ministry.
If you're building a brand new church today from scratch, the usual guideline is that your gathering space and meeting space should equal square footage wise your sanctuary. It should be about the same as your sanctuaries space wise. Ours isn't quite that big, but it's close, and that has been a big plus side, I think, for St. Matthew's community.
I've done some consulting, which you're absolutely right. The other thing is in the 50s, with everybody moved out, and you don't find churches in this area with any parking, because you walked to church. You went in and you met your people in your congregation all week long where you shopped, and you weren't that interested in fellowship. Now people don't know each other, so this fellowship is really critical. But I think what is so absolutely interesting to me is the question that I have, we have Pure Gas Station. Did you sell some of your parking to the fire station?
No.
You're on the wrong side of the street, Carl.
The fire station, their new parking lot, a house was torn down
Okay,
there.
I was wondering on that diagram, okay.
Yeah.
No, that
Carl, you gotta go across
Yeah.
Underwood there.
It's across Underwood, our other parking lot. and-
Pure Oil is just right outside the
Yeah,
door
it's
here,
right
right
here.
here on the corner.
In our parking lot.
In this
So I
parking lot.
know, I know, but this direction is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The fire station bought all private homes,
Yeah,
and that
every-
was very controversial too,
Yeah.
because these people wanted, they
Yeah.
thought they won the lottery. And they wanted, some of them wanted almost $1 million for the home.
Yeah, what's interesting, the three priorities for a growing church is parking, parking, parking. And the growing churches in this area have bought up shopping malls with all the free parking. And they're growing, which is kind of
Yeah,
interesting.
it's always been an issue, but we have been very blessed with that we do have considerable parking, even if it's not as much as it
That's the
should
priority.
be.
Yeah, one of the first Sundays my daughter and I attended St. Matt's as we were in the process of thinking about joining was the meeting for the vote.
Oh, good.
Oh my God. What is going on? But I did think it was masterful that when we were temporarily having the church in the lower level, that the seats were arranged like the new sanctuary was going to be. So by the time we got upstairs, everyone was used to it.
that three-quarter round.
Right, yeah,
setup.
that was really masterful.
And while it sounds like we're new, my aunt and her cousin Ruth Benteen were actually confirmed here in 1931.
Wow.
Nancy?
How much different is the seating from when the church was this way to the way it is now?
It went from about 260 or 70 to about 430. There was some increase.
Using the graphics.
And then we can set up chairs out in the commons as overflow. We have that capability today too, to get almost to 600.
We've been over 600.
Yeah.
Some fun little facts, when we had the church this way, if you actually look out this window, you can see where the tri-pair windows used to be that we now moved behind the altar on the other. But the woodwork in the old church was a blonde woodwork. And the big tall arches you see going east and west, when they redid it, they now look like they're stained. What they actually did is they painted that stain, that pattern on there. So if you actually go up there, it's a painted stain pattern, a grain pattern.
Another fun little fact that we had a fabric and finishes committee. And that was headed by Pastor Erickson. And they had about a third of the way putting the stain on the big beams that are visible up in the ceiling. And the committee didn't like it. And it wasn't red enough. It was not warm enough. And he made them start over again, go clear back, and start again. They remixed the stain and a little different color, a little redder, and they had to do a good share of it over again. But we wanted it right, and that was the main thing.
Did
And
you have to
along
strip
with
the
that,
original
didn't
one?
you?
No, I don't know if they did or not, or just went over.
Awesome.
And along with that, that one of the things that they did was save all of what they call them, the reredos, all of the parts
The
that were
reredos,
up at the
yeah.
Reredos wall.
altar. And that all had to be very intricately restained and done too.
I think the pulpit went back to the manufacturer 2 or 3 times to get the color right before we agreed with it. So we had a tough committee and a tough general, top sergeant.
Well, the one thing I remember too was Pastor Gary was not enthused about putting a hole in the wall to put a camera that would shine the songs and things on the wall and pictures. He said to Pastor Chris, when you're head pastor, you can do what you want.
Well, Pastor Gary was very reluctant to hang pictures because you had to put a hole in the wall too, but we talked him into a lot of that.
Well, Pastor Gary also was not a computer person. So when Pastor Chris came and wanted to like put it on the wall and all this kind of stuff, that was totally foreign to Pastor Gary. You know, but because Pastor Chris initially worked in computers before he went back to seminary, he had a lot of those ideas, and Gary just wasn't comfortable with it.
Well, Pastor Chris loved to take pictures too.
Definitely.
I remember Pastor Gary said, I took 16 pictures of Matt's wedding, his son, and I'm standing there, I said, you should have had Pastor Chris along, you would have had 3,000. Donna was standing there and she says, you got that right.
That's true. You know, one thing I found was interesting, we had taken Pastor Niebling's thing about the stained glass and looked through it, and when the stained glass was put back, the top and the bottom don't match on two of them with what's in the book.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You could ask Al.
Yeah.
Al did a book about it, didn't you?
Chris actually did the book, and actually Linda actually put the book together.
But there's
Which one?
two of them where the bottoms were switched.
I think that was changed in the new book, but the old book, I'll take a look at that.
But we had gone around with the thing that Pastor Niebling
Mhm,
had given
yeah,
us, and we're comparing, and went, this doesn't match, this is here, not here, you know, so.
We did get them in the
One
right,
was
in the
switched.
same order.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
pretty
no,
much in
just
the
two
same
of the
order.
bottom pieces where the windows came down, two of those were switched. And I think it's towards the back of the church.
By the sacristy?
No, coming this way.
Oh, okay.
Just inside the commons.
Okay.
It's one on that wall.
Okay.
And I think the other one is up on the front wall.
Okay, well, thank you all for listening and adding so much information today.
Well done.
This is a good,
Thank you.
a good
Thanks,
group
Ed.
to talk
I've
to.
always been
Thank
able
you.
to tell you.
Were you-
Oh, I guess I got it. Yeah, you did, I did.
Thank you.
I was thinking about it.